They bet $500 she couldn't even hold the rifle steady with those trembling hands. 7 seconds later, when the impossible shot found its target at 3,000 meters, the silence wasn't just shock. It was the moment an entire Special Forces unit learned they'd been mocking a legend whose longest kill was classified at a distance that officially didn't exist. Seconds before that impossible shot, no one noticed the tattoo on her arm. A tattoo that hid a legacy written in enemy blood. This wasn't about winning a bet, it was the rebirth of a legend from the ashes. If you believe true heroes are defined not by medals, but by quietly earned respect, welcome to the Hidden Heroes community. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and hit the like button to help this story reach more people. So how did it all come to this? It all began 2 years ago at Fort Davidson Military Base. Every morning, the hallways came alive with military precision, but in these halls, Natasha Sterling walked like a ghost. She was 44, and no one noticed her. But one thing defined her: her hands, which trembled ceaselessly. Therefore, she struggled to hold a simple coffee cup with both hands. The soldiers cruelly called her Shaky. To them, she was broken, forgotten, discarded. But Natasha Sterling hadn't vanished. She had simply learned that sometimes survival requires being invisible. "Spilled again, Shaky?" Staff Sergeant Harrison's voice cut like a blade. "Maybe you should stick to sippy cups." 3 soldiers erupted in cruel laughter. Young wolves in uniform, they fed on weakness. To them, Natasha was broken, forgotten, discarded. Natasha said nothing. She never did. Paper towels appeared in her trembling hands, movements methodical despite the obvious struggle. But hidden beneath the tremor was muscle memory whispering of training far beyond custodial work. How she positioned herself maintaining visual awareness, how she organized supplies for accessibility, keeping her back to walls. These were survival instincts. "Heard they're reassigning you somewhere with less breakable stuff," Rodriguez added mockingly. Kim joined in. "Or the motor pool. Oil stains don't show spills." Natasha finished cleaning and straightened. For 2 seconds, her hands went completely still, long enough for muscle memory to override damage, for training to assert itself. Then, the tremor returned. "Excuse me," she said quietly, voice carrying none of the deference they expected. "I need to finish this section." The soldiers moved aside, already dismissing her as they returned to discussions of training and weekend plans. To them, she'd ceased to exist once the entertainment ended. But Natasha Sterling hadn't ceased to exist. She'd simply learned that survival sometimes required invisibility. Monday evenings belonged to the elite. Range Complex Alpha housed Delta Force candidates, Navy SEALs, Marine snipers whose reputations were written in enemy blood. Tonight, 12 shooters gathered, pushing accuracy beyond 2,800 meters. At these distances, physics became the enemy. Every variable multiplied into failure. Harrison dominated the group, his 2,420-meter record worn like a crown. Beyond 3,000 meters, that's where reality stops and fantasy begins. Mitchell nodded approval. At 58, Mitchell had forgotten more about marksmanship than most would learn. "Tonight we're working extended distances," Mitchell announced, starting 2,200 meters, progressing to 2,800. Shooters began preparation, rifles checked, scopes adjusted, ammunition inspected. Every detail mattered at distances exceeding a mile. Natasha moved through the adjacent corridor, her cart squeaking. The administrative wing needed cleaning, and work continued regardless of training schedules. Through ballistic glass, Natasha watched the elite struggle with distances she'd once dominated. Every miss, every curse, every assertion of impossibility was processed by a mind that understood killing at impossible ranges. When Rodriguez missed his 6th shot at 2,600 meters, Natasha calculated the correction. 2 minutes left, 1 up. When Harrison declared 3,000 meters impossible, she almost smiled, because some impossibilities were just untested truths waiting for the right moment. Want to know what happened when she finally stepped up? Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from first. Now, back to the story. 2,500 meters is maximum for accuracy, Rodriguez explained. Beyond that, you're fighting physics. Kim added, Math breaks down past 2,800 meters. Even perfect calculations, inconsistencies make hits luck. Mitchell's voice carried authority. While 2,800 represents practical limits, exceptional circumstances occasionally produce longer engagements. Harrison reinforced his position. Sir, anything beyond 3,000 meters is impossible. Physics don't allow it. Perhaps, Mitchell replied diplomatically, though I've reviewed after-action reports that might surprise you. Classified reports, sir? Kim asked eagerly. Highly classified, remaining so for good reason. Because some lessons could only be learned through experience, some truths only proven through demonstration. 2 hours in, Natasha made a decision. She secured her cart and walked toward the range entrance. Natasha approached Sergeant Davis, hands trembling as she reached for paperwork. Restricted area tonight, Davis explained. Civilian access limited. I'd like observer status, Natasha said, producing military-dependent identification. I have operational experience. Davis examined documentation. Your husband's service gives access, but these are weapon systems that might be disturbing. I'm familiar with the Barrett M82A1, Natasha replied. Effective range 1,800 meters, maximum beyond 4,000. Davis stared. How do you know those specs? My husband taught me comprehensive security preparation. Davis authorized observer access behind ballistic barriers. Thank you, Sergeant. That's all I'm requesting. As Natasha made her way toward the complex, conversation among shooters had evolved into heated technical debate about theoretical long-range limits. Harrison held court, using his position as most experienced shooter to establish definitive boundaries on achievable distances. I've been shooting professionally 8 years, he declared confidently. Studied ballistic tables, analyzed environmental factors, pushed every equipment piece to absolute limits. 3,000 meters is where physics defeats human capability. Period. Rodriguez, eager demonstrating expertise, supported the assertion. Bullet drop alone at that distance requires elevation adjustments beyond most scope accommodation. Even perfect calculations, manufacturing tolerances make consistency impossible. Wilson, learning but anxious contributing, added observation. Plus, flight time becomes so extended that target movement renders accuracy purely theoretical. Mitchell listened with patient instructor expression, allowing students exploring concepts through debate. He had opinions about extreme range possibilities based on classified after-action reports these young soldiers would never see. But classroom theory and field reality often existed in different universes. Gentlemen, he interjected gently, while technical analysis is sound, remember combat conditions sometimes demand attempts at distances peacetime training considers impractical. Question becomes not whether such shots are consistently achievable, but whether they're worth attempting when lives depend on outcome. Kim seized the opening. But sir, attempting impossible shots wastes ammunition and reveals positions. Wouldn't focusing on achievable engagements within proven ranges be better? Reasonable question, demonstrating good tactical thinking. Mitchell nodded approval before responding. Most circumstances, absolutely correct. But extraordinary situations occasionally require extraordinary responses. Key is understanding difference between impossible and extremely difficult. Harrison remained unconvinced. Sir, respectfully, I've never seen documentation of successful engagement beyond 2,850 meters. Even that required perfect conditions and exceptional luck. Documentation you've seen, Mitchell corrected gently. Classification levels exist for good reason. Some achievements remain unacknowledged for operational security. Conversation was interrupted by Davis's voice over range intercom. Range control to firing line. Observer joining tonight's session. Military dependent with technical background. Approved for observation area access. Through the main entrance, Natasha Sterling appeared. She moved with careful deliberation of someone managing physical disability, trembling hands gripping visitor clipboard as she was escorted to observation area behind firing line. Shooters glanced briefly, noting custodial uniform and obvious handicap, before dismissing her as base-dependent, satisfying curiosity about military training. Attention returned immediately to technical discussion, but Mitchell found himself studying the newcomer carefully. Something about movement patterns, despite obvious hand tremor, suggested familiarity with military environments beyond dependent spouse experience. How she positioned herself maintaining visual contact with entrances while keeping back to solid cover indicated tactical awareness most civilians never developed. "Ma'am," he called politely, "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, Range Safety Officer. Questions about what you're observing, please ask." Natasha nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Colonel. I'm particularly interested in long-range precision work you're conducting." "Specific aspects. We're currently working distances between 2,200 and 2,800 meters, depending on shooter capability and environmental conditions. I'm curious about maximum range capabilities. What's the furthest target distance available?" Harrison answered before Mitchell could respond. "Ma'am, this range extends to 3,200 meters, but strictly for equipment testing. No human shooter achieves consistent accuracy at such distances." Natasha's response surprised everyone within hearing. "I'd like to try." The range fell silent, except distant wind through the valley. 12 elite soldiers, 1 range safety officer, and 1 sergeant first class stared at the trembling-handed janitor who just requested permission to attempt a shot their best marksman declared impossible. Harrison was first to recover. "Ma'am, I think you're misunderstanding equipment we're using. These are military-grade precision rifles with significant recoil characteristics, not designed for recreational shooting." "I understand," Natasha said quietly. "I'd still like to try." Rodriguez joined the conversation, tone condescending in ways young soldiers often adopted, explaining reality to civilians. "Ma'am, the rifle alone weighs 30 pounds with bipod and optical system. Recoil force would knock most people down. Noise requires specialized hearing protection." "I understand, and I'd still like to try." Kim felt obligated explaining fundamental problems. "Ma'am, even if you could handle the weapon physically, calculations required for extreme-range shooting take years training to master. Windage, elevation, atmospheric density, Coriolis effect, advanced concepts requiring—" "I understand physics," Natasha interrupted gently. "Bullet drop follows parabolic trajectory modified by atmospheric drag. Wind deflection increases exponentially with distance. Temperature affects air density and powder burn rates. Humidity changes both air resistance and bullet stability. Barometric pressure influences atmospheric density calculations." The silence that followed was 12 elite minds breaking. Harrison stared like she'd spoken alien languages. Rodriguez blinked repeatedly, his brain refusing to process what he'd heard. Because Natasha hadn't just recited technical data, she'd provided a complete ballistic solution that would require most snipers several minutes with computers and environmental sensors. The kind of mental calculation that separated legends from mortals. "Ma'am," Mitchell said slowly, "those are graduate-level ballistics computed in seconds. Where exactly did you acquire such knowledge?" Natasha's hands had stopped trembling entirely as she made final scope adjustments. "Experience," she whispered, and the word carried the weight of battles these boys would never see. Mitchell made a decision proving more significant than anyone could anticipate. "Ma'am, if you're genuinely interested attempting long-range shooting, I can arrange proper safety equipment and supervision. However, I must advise you that physical demands are considerable." Harrison immediately objected. "Sir, respectfully, this doesn't seem advisable. Liability issues alone are my responsibility." Mitchell cut him off firmly. "Ma'am, are you prepared to accept this is inherently dangerous activity requiring strict adherence to safety protocols?" "I am," Natasha replied without hesitation. Wilson whispered to Kim, "This is crazy. She'll hurt herself." Kim nodded. "Or embarrass herself trying." But Rodriguez found himself studying Natasha more carefully. Something about her calm acceptance of the challenge, the way she'd recited ballistic principles, suggested this wasn't random civilian bravado. "All right then," Harrison said with smirk. "But let's make this interesting. I'll bet $500 you can't even hit the target frame at 3,000 meters. Not talking about precision, just hitting the general target area." The casual cruelty of the wager wasn't lost on anyone present. Harrison was essentially betting against a disabled woman's ability to accomplish something he had declared impossible for trained professionals. Natasha considered the proposition calmly. $500 that I can't hit the target? Target frame, Harrison clarified. 40 inches by 20 inches. At 3,000 meters, that's about the size of a postage stamp to your naked eye. And if I hit it, then I owe you $500 and a public apology. And if I miss, then you admit this was foolish pride and maybe reconsider taking challenges beyond your capabilities. The implicit cruelty of the terms was obvious. Harrison wasn't just betting money. He was betting her dignity, her self-respect, her right to exist in their world without mockery. Natasha Sterling had faced similar challenges before, in places where failure meant more than embarrassment, where impossible tasks were attempted not for demonstration, but because desperate situations demanded desperate measures. I accept your bet, Staff Sergeant, but I have one condition, which is, when I win, you don't just owe me $500 and an apology. You owe me your attention when I explain why your understanding of impossible is limited by your experience. Harrison laughed, the sound carrying across the range. Lady, if you hit that target, I'll listen to whatever you want to say. Then let's begin. Before we continue with what happened next, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow we've got something extra special for you. The next minutes passed in organized chaos as Mitchell arranged the impromptu demonstration. Safety equipment was located and fitted, range protocols explained, and the Barrett M82A1 prepared for someone the soldiers assumed had no significant experience with such weapons. Natasha accepted hearing protection and safety glasses without comment, her trembling hands managing equipment with more skill than expected. When offered assistance adjusting gear, she politely declined, making modifications with practiced efficiency, despite obvious handicap. Ma'am, the rifle system is a Barrett M82A1 in .50 BMG configuration, Mitchell explained formally. Total weight with optics and bipod approximately 32 pounds, recoil impulse significant, roughly equivalent to being punched by a professional boxer. Are you certain you want to proceed? I'm certain, Natasha replied, studying the weapon with expressions suggesting both unfamiliarity and recognition. Harrison continued efforts to dissuade what he considered dangerous mistake. Ma'am, beyond physical challenges, the target at 3,000 meters is barely visible through scope under these lighting conditions. Even experienced shooters struggle maintaining proper sight picture at such distances. What target will I be engaging? Natasha asked. Mitchell pointed toward distant ridgeline where barely visible markers indicated various ranges. Standard military silhouette at 3,000 meters, approximately 40 inches tall by 20 inches wide. Given atmospheric conditions and your unfamiliarity with this rifle system, I'd recommend starting closer to establish zero and build confidence. 3,000 meters is fine, Natasha said quietly. Rodriguez felt compelled, explaining mathematical challenges. Ma'am, at that distance, even perfect shot requires approximately 3.8 seconds flight time. During those 4 seconds, wind conditions change, target can move. Earth rotation actually affects bullet trajectory. Calculations alone take most snipers several minutes to complete accurately. I understand, Natasha said, approaching the rifle with careful deliberation. Her first contact with the Barrett revealed something making several observers pause. Despite obvious tremor when performing normal activities, the moment she touched the rifle, shaking diminished noticeably. Not completely, neurological damage remained visible, but violent trembling characterizing daily existence reduced to barely perceptible movement. Interesting, Mitchell observed quietly to Davis. Focused concentration sometimes overrides neurological symptoms through adrenaline response and muscle memory. Davis nodded, though attention remained fixed on unusual sight of custodial worker handling military precision equipment with obvious familiarity. How she checked action, verified safety mechanism, examined optical system suggested training far beyond spousal instruction. Natasha settled into shooting position with movements surprising everyone watching. Instead of awkward fumbling expected from civilian, she adopted prone position, demonstrating textbook form. Body alignment optimized for recoil management, left elbow positioned for maximum stability, right hand placement providing precise trigger control without disturbing sight alignment. "Your positioning is excellent," Mitchell commented with genuine surprise. "Your husband must have been exceptional instructor." "He was," Natasha agreed, making fine adjustments to bipod legs with practiced efficiency. Harrison remained skeptical. "Ma'am, proper positioning is only beginning. Ballistic calculations for this distance require—" "Range 3,000 meters," Natasha interrupted softly, voice taking different quality as she settled behind scope. "Wind speed approximately 8 miles per hour northwest, gusting to 12. Temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit, barometric pressure 30.12 inches mercury, humidity 58%, elevation adjustment 47 minutes of angle, windage correction 2 minutes right." Another technically accurate but incomplete response. Mitchell decided to pursue the matter after shooting demonstration, when he could speak privately and determine exactly what experience had produced such remarkable technical competence. "Range is clear," Davis announced over intercom. "All personnel behind safety line. Shooter, you are cleared to fire when ready." Natasha settled into final position, breathing patterns shifting to slow, controlled rhythm, serious marksman developed through extensive practice. Through scope, target appeared as small rectangular smudge against distant hillside, barely distinguishable from surrounding terrain even with 25 times magnification. At 3,000 meters, every variable became critical. Slightest wind shift could push bullets several feet off target. Temperature variations of few degrees would alter air density enough affecting trajectory significantly. Atmospheric pressure changes would modify projectile ballistic coefficient itself, but perhaps most challenging was psychological pressure. 12 elite soldiers watching her attempt something their best marksman declared impossible. Expectation of failure so universal that success seemed not just unlikely but potentially miraculous. Natasha Sterling had felt such pressure before, in places where missing meant more than embarrassment, where failure cost lives rather than credibility, where impossible shots were attempted not for demonstration, but because desperate situations demanded desperate measures. She controlled breathing, allowing heart rate to stabilize. Finger found trigger with practiced precision, applying pressure with consistent technique only coming from thousands of repetitions. Through scope, she watched target as wind indicators provided real-time environmental data. And then, barely audible, she whispered words that froze Mitchell's blood. "Overlord Actual, this is Ghost 7. Target acquired. Range 3,000 meters. Requesting permission to engage. Ghost 7. The call sign from operations that never happened, conducted by units that never existed, in places American forces were never deployed." Mitchell had seen those reports, classified beyond top secret, locked in vaults that most generals would never access. "Permission granted," he breathed, understanding finally dawning. The Barrett erupted like thunder, splitting reality itself. What happened next left everyone speechless. But first, are you subscribed? Because stories like this are exactly why this channel exists. 3.8 seconds of flight time. In those eternal moments, a 5.0 caliber projectile carved through space, shedding velocity, fighting gravity, carrying with it the redemption of a woman the world had forgotten. The electronic impact detector screamed its confirmation before Mitchell's spotting scope could verify what his heart already knew. "Target hit!" His voice cracked with emotion. "Center mass, perfect kill shot." The word impossible died forever in that valley. Range remained silent several more seconds as implications registered in 12 minds simultaneously. The trembling-handed janitor they'd been mocking moments earlier had just accomplished something their best marksman declared impossible. Harrison was first to speak, voice reflecting disbelief. "That's not possible. Target isn't even clearly visible at that distance." Rodriguez fumbled with spotting scope, desperate confirming what electronic systems recorded. "I can barely make out target frame, much less verify impact location." But Mitchell's experience with such equipment was extensive, and confirmation was based on clear visual evidence. "Gentlemen, I observed strike directly. Center mass impact, exactly where it should be for precision shot." Kim shook his head repeatedly. "Calculations alone. Even if everything else was perfect, mathematical complexity was handled correctly, Mitchell interrupted, tone carrying new respect for a woman who remained in shooting position, calmly making rifle safe according to proper protocol. Wilson looked around at more experienced colleagues, seeking explanation for what he'd witnessed. How's this possible? How does someone with no military background make a shot professionals consider impossible? It was Natasha herself who provided answer, speaking quietly as she cleared rifle action and engaged safety mechanism. I never said I had no military background. Statement hung in air like challenge, demanding questions no one seemed prepared to ask. Her hands were trembling again now that intense concentration had passed, but tremor seemed somehow different. Less sign of weakness than evidence of neurological damage caused by circumstances none could imagine. Mitchell stepped forward, expression serious. Ma'am, that was extraordinary demonstration. Would you mind if I asked questions about your shooting background? Natasha rose from firing position slowly, movements careful but confident. What would you like to know? For starters, where did you learn performing ballistic calculations of that complexity without computational aids? Experience, she replied simply. Harrison interrupted, skepticism evident. Ma'am, respectfully, that kind of experience takes years developing. Professional snipers train months just achieving competency at half that distance. Yes, Natasha agreed, it does take years. Rodriguez pressed for specific information. Ma'am, what exactly was your military occupation? Were you some kind of instructor or technical specialist? Instead of answering, Natasha rolled up her left sleeve with the deliberate care of someone unveiling a gravestone. The tattoo she revealed would change everything these soldiers thought they knew. But before we show you what it was, tell us, have you ever had a moment where everything you believed was proven wrong? On her forearm, faded but unmistakable, was ink that rewrote reality. An eagle in flight above crosshairs, wings spread in eternal defiance, with the words Scout Sniper 1-7 beneath. Below that, in smaller letters that carried the weight of classified graves. Afghanistan 2019 to 2020. Rodriguez went ghost white. Scout Sniper 1-7, that unit was disbanded. Erased. It didn't exist, Natasha confirmed quietly. Officially, none of us ever lived. None of us ever died. None of us pulled triggers that saved American lives at distances the Pentagon couldn't admit. Harrison's voice broke like a child's. How many kills? Natasha's eyes found something beyond the present, staring across distances measured in souls rather than meters. I stopped counting after 100. There were so many more. Harrison stared at Tattoo as if it might disappear if he looked away. Ma'am, if you're Scout Sniper 1-7, then you're... But records show. Records show what they were designed to show, Mitchell interrupted, voice carrying new understanding. Isn't that correct, Staff Sergeant Sterling? It was first time anyone had addressed her by military rank, and effect was immediate. Posture straightened slightly, expression shifted from civilian deference to military bearing, and when she spoke, voice carried quiet authority of someone accustomed to life and death responsibility. Staff Sergeant Natasha Sterling, Scout Sniper 1-7, at your service, sir. Mitchell nodded slowly. And your longest confirmed engagement, Staff Sergeant? Natasha's eyes seemed to focus on something beyond immediate present, as if looking across distances extending far beyond 3,000-meter range they'd just used. Officially, 2,847 meters, Helmand Province, Afghanistan, March 2020. And unofficially? Natasha's hands trembled slightly as she looked down at them, then back at assembled soldiers. Unofficially, there are shots that never made reports. Distances deemed too extraordinary to document. Operations so classified they were erased from existence. What happened to your hands? Wilson whispered. Natasha raised her trembling fingers, watching them shake like autumn leaves in an endless storm. Final operation. IED took out our convoy. Shrapnel severed nerves, but that's not what broke me. Her voice dropped to silence. It was watching my spotter die while I held him, knowing my steady hands, hands that never missed, couldn't save the one person who mattered most. The tremor wasn't weakness, they realized. It was grief, given physical form. Medical board said I was finished. Honorable discharge, disability check, and a recommendation for work that wouldn't require fine motor skills. Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. Turns out cleaning floors is perfect for broken snipers. Nobody expects much from shaking hands. Rodriguez looked stricken. Ma'am, we've been calling you. We didn't know. Shaky, Natasha supplied with slight smile. I know. It's accurate, if not particularly creative. Harrison stepped forward, his earlier arrogance cremated in the fire of humility. Staff Sergeant, we called you Shaky. We mocked you. We treated you like... His voice shattered. Jesus Christ, we treated a legend like garbage. You treated a broken woman with the casual cruelty that comes naturally to young soldiers, Natasha corrected, but her tone held no anger. I was broken. I am broken. The difference is that broken doesn't mean useless. She looked at each of them, her gaze carrying the weight of 100 kills and 1,000 regrets. You want to know why I took your bet? Why I risked humiliation for $500? They waited, holding their breath. Because for 2 years, I've watched you boys play soldier while I cleaned up after you. And tonight, I needed to remember who I used to be, just once, before the shaking wins completely. Kim pressed for more information about her service record. Ma'am, Scout Sniper 17 was legendary, the longest confirmed kills in military history. How many operations did you participate in? Classified, Natasha replied automatically, and likely to remain so for decades. Mitchell understood the security implications better than the younger soldiers. Staff Sergeant, your presence here, working in a custodial capacity. Was this arranged through official channels? Partially, she admitted. The VA helped place me in a position where I could maintain some connection to military life while managing my disability. This base needed custodial staff, and I needed work that didn't require steady hands. But there's more to it than that, Mitchell observed. Natasha hesitated before responding. Sometimes, former special operations personnel are placed in positions where they can maintain observation and security awareness, even if they're no longer capable of active duty. The implications of that statement settled over the group like a blanket. For 2 years, while they had been dismissing her as irrelevant, Natasha Sterling had been quietly observing everything that happened on the base. Every conversation, every security protocol, every personnel movement had been processed by someone with extensive intelligence training and threat assessment experience. You've been watching us, Rodriguez said with dawning realization. I've been watching everything, Natasha confirmed. It's what I was trained to do. The only difference is that now I report to different people and my observations have different purposes. As evening wound down and equipment was secured, the 12 soldiers stood transformed. They had witnessed more than an impossible shot. They had seen redemption take physical form, watched a ghost return from exile to reclaim her place among the living. Harrison approached last, the $500 cash thick in his trembling hands. Ma'am, this doesn't feel right. Taking your money after what we... Keep it, Natasha interrupted, shouldering her cleaning supplies. But understand something, Staff Sergeant. That shot wasn't about money. It was about proving that legends don't die. They just learn to hide their time. She paused at the range exit, her silhouette framed against the darkness beyond. Tomorrow I'll be back to cleaning your floors. You'll see the shaking hands and remember the broken janitor. But somewhere in the back of your minds, you'll also remember Ghost 7. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think twice before you decide who's worth your respect. The door closed behind her with the finality of a gravestone inscription. But in the distance, barely visible through the ballistic glass, a target at 3,000 meters bore witness to the night a legend refused to stay buried. The trembling in her hands continued as she walked back toward the administrative building, a constant reminder of damage that had ended her career. But tonight, those same hands had proven that some things, skill, determination, the warrior spirit itself, could never truly be broken. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who don't need to tell you how dangerous they are. Sometimes real heroes are the ones who never get parades. And sometimes, when you think you know who you're dealing with, you discover you don't know anything at all. Staff Sergeant Natasha Sterling had just reminded an entire Special Forces unit of that truth. With one impossible shot at 3,000 meters, she'd proven that legends don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just clean the floors until someone finally pays attention.